her life changed. The house that once smelled of peace and laughter became a place of tears and punishment. She was only a child when he died, but she never forgot how warm his hands felt, or the way he looked at her like she was his sunshine. "You are my little princess," he always said. "No matter what happens, you must stay kind." But after his death, no one called her a princess again. Her mother, Mrs. Rose, changed. Her heart became hard like stone. She no longer looked at Jessica with love. She looked at her like a burden. "You are a girl," her mother would say, "useless like your dead father. What will your beauty do for me?" Jessica didn't know how to answer, so she worked. She swept the floor before dawn. She fetched water before the sun rose. She washed her sister's clothes and ironed them till her fingers turned red. Still, it was never enough. Her two elder sisters, Margaret and Bella, never lifted a finger. They sat under the mango tree to paint their nails while Jessica cooked. They dressed in bright gowns and powdered their faces while Jessica carried basins of dirty clothes on her head. When she returned late from errands, they beat her. Sometimes with a broom, sometimes with a belt, sometimes with their words. "You are not our sister," Bella once said. "You are just a shadow in this house." Jessica slept on the cold floor near the kitchen, wrapped in an old wrapper that once belonged to her father. Her only comfort was the memory of his voice, soft and kind. Sometimes at night she would cry silently and whisper, "Daddy, are you watching me? Can you see what they are doing?" Nobody outside the house knew the truth. People thought Jessica was quiet by choice, not because she was broken. Her mother and sisters smiled in public and acted like a happy family. But at home, they treated her worse than a stranger. Whenever they went for a village occasion, Jessica followed behind like a servant. She carried their bags, held their shoes, and cleaned their feet when they returned. They never introduced her as family. If people asked, they would say, "Oh, she's just someone helping us." But Jessica never complained. She still believed in goodness. She still believed something could change. Maybe one day someone would see her, not the dirt on her clothes or the silence in her mouth, but the strength in her heart. One afternoon, while scrubbing the floor outside, she overheard some girls talking in excited tones. "The prince is doing a birthday celebration next week," one said, "and he will choose his wife that same day." Jessica looked up slowly, her heart beating. But she quickly looked down again. She knew her place in this world, and it was never beside a prince, or so she thought. The news spread like fire. Every corner of the village buzzed with one topic: the prince's birthday. It wasn't just any birthday. It was the day he would choose his bride. The king had spoken. The queen had agreed. And the prince himself would point at the girl who pleased his heart the most. Girls who never cared about royal matters suddenly began to dream. Tailors became busy. Mothers rushed to borrow jewelry. Even some married women began to secretly prepare, hoping the prince's eyes would mistakenly fall on them. Jessica watched the excitement from the corner of her compound. She heard it from children playing. She heard it from market women. Even the woman who sold onions shouted with joy, "My daughter will wear lace. She will dance before the prince." At home, the fire in Margaret and Bella's eyes grew brighter. They ran around the house looking for the perfect dress. They spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing their smiles. One evening, Margaret turned to Jessica and said, "You know what? I don't even need to do much. I know the prince will pick me." "Look at me," Bella laughed. "Maybe he'll pick me instead. I'm smarter." Jessica sat on the floor, peeling cassava. She said nothing, but deep inside something stirred in her heart. A small, quiet voice asking, "What if you went too?" That night, as she washed her sister's clothes under the moonlight, Jessica whispered to herself, "I want to see the palace, just once in my life." She waited for the right time to ask. It came 2 days before the event. "Mama," she said softly, standing by the door, "please, may I go to the prince's birthday?" Mrs. Rose turned slowly, her face already hard. "Go where?" "To the prince's celebration. I will stand at the back. I just want to see." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then came the laughter. Margaret laughed so hard she fell on the floor. Bella clapped her hands like she heard a joke. "You?" she said. "Jessica the slave? What will you wear? That torn thing on your body?" Mrs. Rose shook her head. "Don't disgrace us. Stay in the kitchen." Jessica lowered her head. She returned to her chores, but her heart was heavy. That night she went to the small wooden box under the kitchen table. Her father's old things. Inside, folded neatly, was a faded shirt. It was torn at the collar and stained in some parts, but she pressed it against her chest. It still smelled faintly of her father. "I will wear this," she whispered, "even if they laugh, even if I'm chased away. I will go." She washed the shirt carefully and hung it under the moonlight. She didn't sleep that night. She kept touching the shirt, praying silently that her father would protect her. The day was coming, the day she would walk into the palace, not as a princess, not as a guest, but as a girl who just wanted to be seen. The sun rose early that morning, as if it too was eager to witness the prince's grand celebration. Birds chirped loudly. Drums echoed from the palace, rolling across the village like thunder. Every home felt alive. Mothers woke up their daughters with joy, plaiting their hair and dressing them like queens. But in Jessica's house, the mood was different. Margaret was screaming because her dress wasn't ironed well enough. Bella was shouting because her shoes had dust. And in the middle of the storm stood Jessica, ironing, cleaning, packing and tying headscarves, all with hands that trembled from exhaustion. "Jessica!" her mother barked. "Be quick with that powder and polish Bella's nails properly." "You're so slow." "Yes, Ma," Jessica replied, kneeling on the floor. Her body ached, but she never said a word. She'd woken before dawn to sweep and cook, so no one would accuse her of laziness. Then she quietly went to the backyard and put on her father's old shirt. She had tied a wrapper around her waist and brushed her hair the best she could. But as soon as she stepped into the main compound, Margaret burst into laughter. "Are you going to the palace like that?" she mocked, pointing at Jessica's torn shirt. Bella clapped her hands and turned in circles. "I've seen it all. A palace beggar has appeared. Should we give her coins before we go?" Even their mother laughed. "Jessica, be wise. Stay home. You're not even a real part of this family." Jessica felt the sting of tears, but she swallowed them. "Let me just come with you. I'll carry your bags like always." "Fine," Margaret said, "but walk behind us, and don't open your mouth there. If anyone asks, say you're our house girl." Jessica nodded. She picked up their heavy bags and followed them. As they walked through the village, people turned to look. Margaret and Bella sparkled like stars in their colorful gowns and shiny shoes. Jessica followed barefoot, her clothes dusty, her feet cracked. Some villagers whispered, others laughed openly. "Who allowed that girl to leave her backyard?" one woman asked. "Maybe she's lost," said another. "She should be fetching." "Water not going to the palace!" Jessica looked down, gripping the bags tighter. Her heart pounded. The closer they got to the palace, the louder the drums became. She had never been there before, but she had heard tales. The golden gates, the high walls, the beautiful dancers, the prince himself. And now she was about to see it all. When they reached the palace gate, the guards looked at the three girls. Their eyes paused on Jessica. "She's with us," Margaret said quickly. "Our helper." The guards waved them in. Jessica entered slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. The palace grounds were bigger than she imagined. Music filled the air. Girls danced in every corner, their gowns glittering like stars. But still something made the prince lift his eyes from the crowd. He saw her, not her torn dress, not her dusty feet. He saw her soul. Jessica stood quietly in a corner of the palace yard, away from the crowd. She held Margaret and Bella's bags and tried not to be seen. Her feet were dusty, and her wrapper was old. Girls in bright gowns moved past her like butterflies. They smiled, danced, and giggled loudly, hoping the prince would notice them. But Jessica didn't smile. She couldn't. She had nothing to smile about. She looked around the palace. The walls were painted with gold. Flowers lined the edges of the yard. Royal drummers beat their drums with pride. Every sound felt like a dream. But Jessica stood like a shadow behind a tree, hoping no one would call her out. On the raised platform sat the royal family. The king wore a red cap and held a staff. Beside him was the queen, graceful and smiling. But all eyes were on the young prince. He sat straight, his eyes calm, his face unreadable. Girls walked up one by one, curtsying before him. Some danced, some sang, others tried to make him laugh. But the prince only nodded politely, his eyes still searching. Jessica didn't know that his eyes had already found her. The moment she walked, something about her pulled him. She wasn't dressed like the others. She didn't try to get his attention. Yet her calmness, the way she stood, the quiet strength in her eyes, it touched something deep in his heart. He leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Who is that girl?" "Which one?" the queen asked, surprised. "The one by the tree in the old shirt." The queen followed his eyes and frowned. "I don't know. She looks like a servant." But the prince kept watching. He wasn't looking for beauty. He wasn't looking for riches. He was looking for truth, and in Jessica he saw it. Meanwhile, Bella and Margaret were busy performing. Margaret sang a song, twisting her waist as she danced. Bella followed, smiling widely and batting her eyes, but the prince barely glanced at them. His eyes kept drifting back to the girl behind the tree. "Go and bring her," he told a guard quietly. The guard blinked. "Your Highness? The girl behind the tree? Bring her to me." The guard nodded and walked into the crowd. Jessica saw him coming. Her heart sank. "Did I do something wrong?" she wondered. "You," the guard said gently. "The prince wants to see you." Jessica froze. She shook her head. "Me?" "Yes, please come with me." People began to stare. Whispers grew. Margaret and Bella turned, shocked. "What is she doing?" Bella hissed. "Why is the guard talking to her?" Jessica dropped the bags slowly. Her hands shook. Her legs felt weak, but she followed the guard step by step until she stood before the prince. Everything went silent. She looked at him and quickly lowered her head, and then the prince stood up. He walked down from the platform, stopped before Jessica, and spoke softly. "What is your name?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "Jessica." He smiled. "I choose you for a moment." Everything stopped. The music faded. The drummers dropped their sticks. The girls stopped dancing. The queen's mouth parted slightly in shock. Even the king leaned forward as if he had misheard his son. The prince had spoken clearly, yet no one believed it. "I choose you," he had said, looking into Jessica's eyes. Jessica stood still, frozen. Her lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but no words came out. She looked around, afraid it was a dream. The wind brushed her face, gentle and warm. It was real. The prince had chosen her. Margaret gasped loudly. No, this can't be right. She's our servant." Bella pushed through the crowd. "Your Highness, please. There must be a mistake. That girl doesn't belong here. Look at her clothes." People started murmuring. Some laughed nervously. Others stared at Jessica with disgust. Her torn shirt, her cracked feet, her rough hands. They couldn't understand why the prince, who had the power to choose any girl in the land, would pick someone who looked like her. The queen stepped forward. "Son," she said carefully, "are you certain? You haven't even spoken to the other girls." The prince turned to her gently. "Mother, I've watched all of them. They came here to perform, to impress. But she She didn't come here to shine. She came with humility. She came with pain, and still she stood with grace. He looked back at Jessica. I saw how she carried the bags. I saw how her sisters mocked her, yet she said nothing. She is strong. She is kind. And I want a wife who has known struggle, so she will value everything. Tears rolled down Jessica's cheeks. She couldn't hold them back anymore. Her knees gave way, and she slowly knelt before the prince. Your Highness, she whispered, I am not worthy. He bent and took her hand. You are more than worthy. You are chosen. The crowd watched in silence. Some began to clap, slowly, then louder. Some still looked on with disbelief, but others began to nod with respect. Margaret and Bella stood like stones, mouths wide open, shame rising in their eyes. Their mother, Mrs. Rose, had arrived late, only to see her maid-like daughter being raised by the prince. Jessica was taken into the palace. She was given clean clothes and a place to rest. The queen, though still shocked, agreed to speak with her privately. The king watched from afar and said, If this is your heart's choice, then so be it. That night, Jessica sat by a window inside the palace chamber. She held a cup of warm tea and looked out at the stars. Just yesterday, she had washed clothes, in tears. Today she wore a silk gown. She touched her chest and whispered, Papa, I hope you're smiling. Jessica could hardly sleep that night. The bed was soft. The sheets smelled of flowers. A servant brought her warm food and bowed before her, but Jessica was not used to any of it. Her mind kept returning to her father's face, the man who once told her she was special, even when she couldn't see it. Now, here she was, lying in a royal room, with guards outside her door, and the whole village whispering her name. The next morning, the queen sent for her. Jessica knelt respectfully before her, heart pounding. The queen studied her for a while. Stand up, she said softly. Tell me about yourself. Jessica rose slowly, her hands shaking. My name is Jessica. I lived with my mother and 2 elder sisters after my father passed. Since then I have done nothing but serve them. They never treated me as family. The queen nodded gently. I saw them yesterday. Their pride nearly blinded the sun. Jessica looked down. I didn't come to the palace to be chosen. I came to see it just once in my life. I never thought... The queen smiled for the first time. Neither did I. But my son's heart sees what the eyes miss, and yesterday I saw it too. There is something in you, Jessica, something rare. Jessica blinked back tears. You must begin your lessons, the queen continued. There is much to learn. You must know how to speak to leaders, walk in the royal court, and understand matters of the land. Jessica nodded quickly. I will. Do my best, Your Majesty. You already have. From that day, everything changed. Royal teachers came to train her. She learned how to sit like a queen, how to eat with royal manners, how to speak with confidence. Her old clothes were burned. The palace maids dressed her in fine linen and braided her hair with golden threads. But through it all, Jessica remained. Humble, she greeted the servants kindly. She thanked everyone who helped her. She never forgot where she came from. Meanwhile, the village was restless. Some people celebrated her. She is proof that the crown looks beyond riches, they said. But others were bitter, especially Margaret, Bella, and their mother. They could not sleep. They refused to eat. They stayed indoors, ashamed. One day they came to the palace gate hoping to speak to Jessica. She will never see you, the guard said. But Jessica, hearing the commotion, came out quietly. She stood before them, dressed in royal silk, her eyes calm. Margaret tried to speak. We didn't know. I did not come here for revenge, Jessica said. I came to heal. But the wounds you gave me, they cut deep. Mrs. Rose knelt. Forgive us. Please. Jessica sighed. I forgive you, but I will never return to that house. She turned and walked back inside, her head held high. The broken girl was gone. A queen was rising, the palace prepared for a new celebration. This time, not for the prince's birthday, but for the announcement of his chosen bride. Jessica's name spread across every home, every market stall, every whisper. They called her the girl in torn clothes. They called her the slave who became a queen, but now everyone wanted to see her again, this time dressed in royal beauty. Inside the palace, Jessica stood before a large mirror. She hardly recognized herself. Her skin glowed. Her hair was woven in long, graceful braids. A necklace of fine stones rested on her chest. But even with all the beauty, she still whispered her father's words to herself, "Stay kind, my little princess." The prince knocked lightly and entered. She turned quickly, her eyes wide. "You still bow when I enter?" he asked gently. She smiled. "You are still the prince." He walked up to her. "Not when I'm with you. With you I am just a man whose heart chose you." Jessica looked down, shy but calm. "I have watched you," he said, "not just with my eyes, but with my soul. You remind me what true strength looks like." Jessica blinked away tears. "I never believed someone like you could see someone like me." The prince reached for her hand. "Then believe it now." That evening the king called a royal gathering. Leaders from nearby villages arrived. Music played. Dancers moved like the wind. The air smelled of roasted meat and sweet fruit wine. Finally, the moment came. The prince stood before the crowd and said, "In this world, beauty is everywhere. But the kind of beauty that touches the soul is rare. I have found it in Jessica." He turned and held out his hand. Jessica stepped forward slowly. She wore a flowing gown of deep blue, with silver threads shining in the light. The crowd gasped. Some didn't recognize her at first. But then the whispers started. "It's her. It's the same girl from the tree. She's more than beautiful. She's royal already." Jessica knelt before the king and queen. The king smiled and lifted her up. "From today," he said, "you shall no longer be called the girl in rags. You shall be known as Princess Jessica, the heart of our son." Cheers filled the palace. Fireworks lit the sky. From a dark past, Jessica had walked into light. She stood tall, not just because of what she wore, but because of who she had become. Margaret and Bella, hiding in the back, could only watch with regret. They had spent their lives chasing attention, but Jessica, who never chased anything but peace, now had the crown. That night, as the stars covered the sky, Jessica stood on the palace balcony. She closed her eyes and said softly, "Papa, they see me now." A warm breeze brushed her face like a father's hand, and Jessica smiled. The days passed gently, each one like a healing balm on Jessica's wounded heart. Though the palace was grand, though the maids now waited on her, and though she sat beside the prince at royal meetings, Jessica never let pride enter her soul. She remembered the cold nights on the kitchen floor. She remembered the pain of silence, the weight of carrying her sister's bags, and the sting of being called worthless. And because she remembered, she remained kind. She asked the royal cooks to prepare extra food for the poor. She visited the village well, where she once fetched water barefoot, and built a new one for the women. She even sent fine wrappers and food to widows who had no voice. Slowly, the villagers began to see her not just as the prince's bride, but as a blessing to the land. The queen watched her closely and smiled one morning. "I feared my son made a poor choice," she confessed. "But now I see he chose a queen with a heart of gold." Jessica knelt. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will never forget how far I've come." The prince, too, loved her more each day. He would often say, "I chose you in front of the crowd, but I will love you even when no one is watching." His words filled her with peace. One quiet afternoon, Jessica walked to the palace garden alone. She sat by the tree where white flowers bloomed. The sun was soft. Birds sang. A butterfly landed on her palm and sat still. Jessica closed her eyes and whispered, "Papa, I hope you are proud of me." And then a soft wind passed through the garden. The white flowers swayed gently, though no one else was near. Jessica felt warmth settle on her shoulders, not from the sun, but something deeper, something unseen. She smiled through tears. It was his blessing. The wedding was held a few weeks later. The village had never seen anything like it. People came from far and near. The streets were decorated with ribbons. Drums beat like never before. And when Jessica walked into the royal court, wearing a golden crown and holding the prince's hand, the whole land stood still in awe. Even her mother, Margaret, and Bella were invited. They came with heads bowed, too ashamed to speak. Jessica saw them, and she did not turn her face away. Instead, she walked to them and said quietly, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because my heart needs peace." They wept, and for the first time, her mother hugged her with real tears in her eyes. That night, as she stood beside the prince at the palace balcony, looking down at the stars, Jessica knew her journey had not been easy. She had walked through fire. She'd been mocked, used, and thrown aside. But now she was seen. Now she was chosen. And finally, she was home.